Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to an episode of Outside the Panels. I'm your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and joining me on this blustery, frigid, cold December evening is a crowdfunder extraordinaire, a writer, a cartoonist, an illustratorist. Is that the right word? It's Mr. Mark Stafford. Mark, how's it going?
Hello. It's going fine, or it's ticking over, or it's still not enough finished to have me sleep at night very well. But other than that, it's okay.
Good. That sounds. I'll take that as a good thing. The fact that I'm talking to a fellow Brit means that for once I don't have to worry about time zones. So that's cool. So, Mark, we're here to talk about your crowdfunder project, and this is Salmonella Smorgasbord, correct?
Yep.
Is that correct? Yep. A collection of crimes against cartooning. Wow.
Yeah.
So, let's start at the top and work our way down. What the hell's wrong with cartooning, man?
Nothing's wrong with cartooning.
Good answer.
Yeah. It's the best. I don't know. I thought it was an amusing title. That's essentially it. That's why it's called that. It's called Salmonella Smorgasbord because the last time I collected a bunch of stuff together in small press, that was called Botulism Banquet. So if I'm going to form in 20 years' time, I ought to have another food poisoning themed anthology, and I've got a bunch of years to come up with a title for that one.
I've got one for you. COVID Conopecia. There you go. Have that one. That's on me. Take it. Well, yeah, that's why you're the creative guy, and that's why I just talk about comics, right? Yeah, come on. Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah. So, Mark, you're a Brit creating comic books. You don't work for 2000 AD, so that makes you a bit of a rarity, I'm afraid. How is it you got into comic books and cartooning?
Not for one to try around that age. No, like kind of brief history is I grew up in Dorset or Christchurch, Dorset, in Dorset, kind of creative family, kind of did a foundation course, always loved cartooning, house full of books and whatever. Moved to London in 1990 to do a graphic design course, dropped out, kind of hung around trying to get into comics, and utterly do so for a time. And I look back and it was kind of the early 90s and I had like every opportunity to do so because it was the early UCACs, all the Marvel editors were around, all the DC editors around, the 2000 AD editor at the time, like Dave Bishop, I think was like vaguely accessible. There was all these like terrible imitators of Viz that were throwing opportunities at everybody, and yet I managed to dodge all these.
Well done.
All these chances of paying employment, and then just kind of hover around. I did loads of small press. I kind of hovered around on the edge of the scene. I started going to, in the early 90s, the Comics Creators Guild. Where I met people like Brian Talbot and Hunt, and whoever would turn up there. And I got loads of stuff in little anthologies and some stuff in kind of the dope smoking magazines that they came out of Glasgow, Northern Lights and whatever. So I was in those. They had a barcode on the back. So they looked official. But it was like
the barcode was the barcode was the address to get some dope.
Most probably. I don't, but it took yonks until kind of the early 2000s when Brian Talbot, who'd always liked my stuff, kind of approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to draw this book that I've written, but I don't want to." It was based on an animation, an idea for an animation show that never quite came to anything. It was an internet animation company in the early 2000s, and none of them ever came to anything. So so I did. I did about 200 pages of a book called Cherubs, mostly from Brian Bouts, and that ended up with Dark Horse, which finally came out in 2012, I think. But it was all a back end deal. So I did about 200 odd pages of a book which paid no bloody money, but it was enough to get an official book out and to start hanging around the Cartoon Museum. And being their kind of cartoonist in residence, as it were. And that got me places, and that got me to eventually meeting Dave Hine, with whom I've done 3 other books. But all that time I was creating little strips for myself, and illustrations and beer labels and odds and sods of all the stories I told myself generally were all done within about 20 pages or less. Or 12 pages. There was nothing more than that. So essentially, that's what Salmonella Smorgasbord is. It's all the other stuff. It's all the stuff that isn't in Lip Hook or Man Who Laughs or The Bad Place. It's a smorgasbord. That would be the word for it.
Smorgasbord of creation. There we go. I've got to say, looking through the book, and thank you so much for sending me in advance on that. I think you absolutely did not miss a thing by not joining Marvel UK or DC at the time, because your stuff just, I mean this with the greatest of respect and compliments, your stuff doesn't fit Marvel or DC, even when DC had Vertigo going on. There's a very distinct British, almost Monty Python-esque style to some of your art that I think just would not translate at that time, when, because you thought early 90s, everyone's about image, talk about muscles on top of muscles. It was all the superhero crowd. The indie crowd took a bit of a pasting because Image had just come up to kick Dark Horse's ass. It wouldn't be for another 10 years before the indie market and Kickstarters became so prevalent. So I don't think you missed a trick by not being part of that at all. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of whether I would have gotten anywhere if I'd properly put in the time and if I chased up every window. I've no idea, because it's always been a bit. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I tell to kids who like in the Cartoon Museum when they're asking about how do you get a style, and it's like style isn't something you end up with. Something you aim for. It's something you end up with.
Yeah,
it's just what happens to you after a certain amount of time. You make a bunch of decisions on how you draw stuff, and it ends up you go. And after a while, you go like, "Well, that's me, I guess." It's like you certain cartoonists, and you don't like other cartoonists, and you go, "Why do I not like and whatever?"
Yeah. So then explain.
For what I've ended up in this area where everything I draw looks a bit creepy, and
works for me.
And I guess that's me. That's the age of,
Cool. So explain it to me. Explain it to me like I'm a complete and utter idiot, although some degree I already am. What is the difference between a cartoonist and a comic book illustrator, in your mind?
The definition I use, and I think it's a fairly simple one, is that a cartoonist generates their own material. Draw pictures they want, or they come up with an idea that they think is funny, or they write their own scripts or whatever. I think that's a cartoonist as opposed to a comics artist who is generally interpreting other people's scripts.
All right, okay, cool.
And that's the thing.
Coming from now.
None of these. That's the problem with like cartoon comics, whatever. Graphic novel, none of these things are set in stone. It's one of the reasons why none of us can have a decent conversation about a lot of this, because a lot of the time we're talking about cross purposes. A load of people just use the word meaning pretty much anything from a 5-minute long animation to newspaper strip. They'll call that a cartoon. They'll call a graphic novel a cartoon. They'll call everything a cartoon.
Yeah. Well, they're just idiots. They're just idiots. So in my head, if you talk about a newspaper strip. When you're talking about newspaper strip, I'm thinking Garfield, I'm thinking Calvin and Hobbes. To me, that's a comic strip. That's in my head.
Yeah.
The comic book is Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. Cartoons, in my, I suppose, ideal British mind, cartoons are kind of like a little bit more esoteric, and they're kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and they're kind of a little bit off the mainstream. Maybe pointing fun at somebody. And that's kind of, I suppose that's my upbringing of looking at cartoons through. I don't know if you remember, but tabloids like The Sun and The Mirror, they used to have that page, didn't they? The political satire next to the editor's
The Sun
opinion.
Had the Sun spot,
And that was my introduction to cartooning.
Yeah. But and things as a kid that cartoon everywhere. So to my like kid mind, it was this slow realization after you realize, oh my god, somebody draws these things. There seem to be a million places for them to go. And over my adult life, a lot of those places have slowly disappeared. All the little spot cartoons in tabloids disappeared. All the strips in the backs of the newspaper disappeared. But they're still,
you're right.
I mean, like working for the Cartoon Museum, it's still a kind of vibrant scene based around like physical cartooning at least. And there's a grand history going back to like Gilray and Hogarth and Rowlandson and all these like really nasty, scabrous humour directed at the powers that be and stuff like that. So that's a grand old tradition in this country, I think, at least.
Agreed. Yeah.
Which I'm not entirely sure I'm part of. But there was also that thing of, if you remember, Giles annuals and things like that. It was always seemed to be in dentist with Punch magazine and stuff like that. There was this kind of world of slightly more middle class cartooning or whatever. But they would like huge people like Thelwell, Giles, Ronald Searle, hugely loved by the general public. And I think because the market's become so atomized, we don't get those massive figures anymore, because even the best-selling newspaper just doesn't have that kind of international reach. No, there aren't such things as Giles Annual, not an equivalent or whatever.
Yeah, I hear what you said. If I'm reading The Sun, I'm only reading it for the problem page and the photo story. That's all I'm doing.
I would still feel guilty at doing that.
I don't know. That's where the last half-naked girl is. What can I say? There's always a half-naked girl in the photo story. Now they've taken away page 3. All 7 for you guys, people who like the guys. Sorry. Yes, I'm a child of my youth. So what can you say? When it comes to crowdfunding, this is on a crowdfunder page. So why did you go crowdfunding and not Kickstarter? Just as a matter of interest.
That's a decision made by John Anderson of Soaring Penguin, who's the publisher, more than me. But I think there was a general thing of, I think Kickstarter started to be very cozy with crypto and NFT, and there was a general feeling of from the creative community, or at least Lucy Sullivan, who just had her book Shelter, Early Doors, which I did some promo for. She just funded her book through crowdfunder, so and we just thought, okay, that worked. It probably would have been easier to fund it through Kickstarter just because it's better known as a brand. Well, but like I say, John's decision more than mine. I don't know.
No, all right. Well, I've got your page here, so if you give me two shakes of a lamb's tail, we'll have a look and see where you currently sit. We've got all the mod cons going on here. Boom! There we are. There is your crowdfunder page. You are currently sitting at £2,415, 81% of your 3K goal, 69 contributors. That's brilliant, isn't it? That's 69 people. That's a huge
if you look down. If you scroll down to like the contributors today, it was like Jean Ha, Brian
Whoa.
Talbot. It was like a list of a really sweet message from Mike Mignola today.
Shut up.
Just saying lovely
He's
things
one of my
about
guys.
which are probably not healthy. Probably not healthy for my ego to be complimented so much so early in the morning.
Well, dude, I would take that.
But he was saying like, "Oh, I'm one of the artists that makes him scared to pick up a pen," and I'm going like, "Bollocks!"
Man, his work is gorgeous. I love
so interesting and so good. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
I was like
recent
a
Tony
couple
Bennett,
last few months, those big chunky Hellboy books. Yeah.
Oh man, there's some absolutely cockers on there, dude.
Ryan Hughes.
Yeah, man, you've got it going on. What can I say? What can I say? Very impressive. Do you find that?
Well, that's the thing. As I said. As I said, I was like hovering around the outside of comics for 20, 30 years, which does mean essentially you know every bugger.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good call. That's a good way of looking at it.
Talbot.
Yeah, big names. So when it comes to your work, who's your inspirations?
I think as I love I'd say Basil Wolverton. Ken Reed, the guy who did Face Ache and whatever for the old children's monthlies. I love Leo Baxendale. I love Ronald Searle, and I loved the Beano in general, and then later on all of the 2000 AD mainstays. So like the late great, we've got to say Kevin O'Neill. Mike McMahon, especially. I was a massive Brian fan, even though you can't see a lot of him in my stuff now. But there's certain things I still do which are Brian Bollandicks, and that kind of crowd. And then I kind of followed them over to America, and then it was people like Dan Clowes and the Hernandez brothers and all that kind of not underground, independent. I don't know what quite
independent.
The name of whole. Yeah, but
like
that's all the stuff kind of Fantagraphics-y.
What was it like then?
I was a superhero person.
Really? No, everyone's a superhero person, right?
What
was I going to say? Right, so
I'm the guy.
So you've left the UK, you've gone to the US. You're now surrounded by this influx of Fantagraphics style books. How did that make you feel that in the UK your art, your work, your cartoon work is a little bit out there for mainstream, but then you go to the US and it's like books like Fantagraphics and then lauding it, they're loving stuff like this. That must have been absolutely, it must have filled your heart full of glee. The fact that, look, there is a place for this kind of stuff.
Well, kinda. It's one of those. Because if you talk to anybody at Fantagraphics, and Roger Langridge, who's the New Zealand guy, I'd say, "Wow, you got books out through Fantagraphics," and he's like going, must be like bringing out records for a really hip, record company. And he's going, "Well, it's more or less the same in that there's no money in it. There's a lot of the time you got paid through Fantagraphics. They'll go, do you want to take any books? Any books you want?" And so they'll kind of pay them in stock. I kind of felt, I'm like reading interview, like just the last week with Dan Clowes and whatever. It was always a struggle for those guys. I always look at the cards and think some of these people are gods. They must be, rewarded and like beautifully in whatever field they're working in. And a lot of the time they're not. But I love the fact that those books and that slowly over time, during my lifetime, the variety of books on the shelves just got kind of better and better. When I got kind of bit, as guy didn't really like superheroes much, and you'd walk into a comic shop and just see like sort of the whole be more or less the same kind of deal. It was Marvel, DC, DC, Marvel, and just slowly that influx of like more and more independence and more varieties of stuff and manga and whatever coming in and giving, hopefully, well, not just me, but everybody slightly more opportunities. Because I do feel that, I don't know, the way a medium is set up encourages the next generation of cartoonists, or doesn't. So there was a million girls during the 80s who walked into a comic shop and just saw a bunch of bulging muscles and, you know, kind of women in, you know, like skimpy bikinis and, you know, with like improbable anatomies, and just thought, oh, well, comics isn't for me then.
Yeah.
And essentially, well, and then manga comes along and says, comics is for you. There is stuff out there for you, or whatever. So I was consistent on, you know,
I don't think you can use manga as an example for that. Every time my wife and I go to sit and watch some anime on Netflix, she always looks at me and goes, "Why is every character a girl? Why are they always wearing a short skirt? And why are they always wearing thigh-high stockings?" I don't know why that is.
I don't know why that is. It just becomes stick after a while. Yeah. But
right, let's have a.
I still think there's part of me that wants to be like sort of, what I'd most like to do would probably be that kind of Fantagraphics book from the early 90s, like an 8-Ball or a Hate or whatever. That thing of 30 odd pages of just like a of stuff and pieces and whatever. That's kind of my ideal comic book for me. Or like the Undergrounds, you know, like the best of the 70s Underground.
It's interesting.
There isn't much space for that.
Not in comic book shops, there isn't. No, but you're absolutely right. I think the big two dominate it. And no matter how much we want people to buy indie books or try new things, we all know that the reason why Joe Bloggs is going into a comic book shop is because they've just been to the cinema, just seen an Avengers movie, and they want to buy an Avengers comic. And if on the way around they pick something else up on the way, that's a win-win. So that's kind of the
I keep hearing from people who run shops that they don't even do well on that grounds. In that, you know, if you love the Marvel movies, a lot of the times you won't be able to walk into a comic shop and find something that's actually like the Marvel movies on the shelves.
That's true. That's true. My local Forbidden,
you know, it's not my ex.
My local Forbidden Planet has more Funko Pops than it does comic books, but there you go.
Oh dear. Yeah.
Oh dear. All right. Okay, time for a quick break before we start looking at some of the art that's featured in Mark's book. This is the advert for if you like comics of a little bit more mature in age, not in style. This show is for you.
Do you want to find out what makes the professor do his happy dance? Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, only on the UCPN.
That's right, the Old Timers Comic Book Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. Coming up, you will have a couple of Christmas-themed episodes to look forward to. Yay. Excellent. All right, so I like the show. I like it. I think it's class. Back to you, Mark. I mean, I am the host on it, so I've got to say that. Let's have a look at some art. Who is this delightful young creature?
Oh, I did. Yeah, it's just an illustration of a mermaid.
Cool.
There's a woman who did. She did a magnificent book called The Fabled Coast, with 2 women, Jennifer Simpson or whatever. And so I read this book which traces myths and legends from around the entire country, and I started reading about mermaids who were slightly more interesting than I thought they were. So I just tried to create something that was like entrancing but creepy at the same time. so she looks
I'm
a
glad
bit
you,
odd
yeah, I'm glad you didn't go the
and
Red
staring.
Dwarf version. Yeah.
Yeah.
If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, go YouTube it. Red Dwarf Mermaid. Go find out. I'm not big. Yeah. Love the colours on this. Love the background, the sunset or moonset, whatever. That looks great. And
It's I've gotten better at, I don't know, more interesting at colouring over the last few years. Of dragging in bits of texture as well on Photoshop and using it to kind of muddy the waters, as it were, so nothing looks too like crisp.
Yeah, and that's a good shout. You know, I absolutely totally appreciate that.
You can do that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one, Mark. I think a lot of indie books that I see, the colours are just like boom on the page, and it's kind of like, come on, guys, dull it down, or texture or stuff.
I kind of have an allergy as well to airbrush style effects. I really don't like them, so I'm trying to do kind of flat colored, but kind of.
That surprises me.
I like watercolor washes and whatever. So there's it's one of those weird kind of things. But it's depending on your taste.
Yeah. Well, you've been around the industry for a while. I would bet my bottom dollar or bottom pound in the UK that probably the biggest innovation in comic books over the last 20 years has been digital colors, right?
Oh my god, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But there's that weird thing it's done to the artwork of a lot of the time these days. The artwork is basically like, if in a production line, is basically creating a holding line for the colorist to come in and do their work, as it were. Where no better the idea of doing really expressive line work. It seems to, like. Yeah, everything tends to look up.
I'd never thought of that. I see a lot of Zenescope books because I review for Comic Crusaders, so I see a lot of different types of books. And one of the things I always notice about Zenescope books, regardless of what we think about like the content, is that the production values are always super high. You know, the colors are gorgeous on every single book. I never thought about it as the way. I never thought about it as the way that the kind of, detracting from the actual pencil element. I never thought about that because the colors could hide. So interesting point.
But I mean, the colors are doing more and more and more of work. So it's basically the penciler or the inker's job just to provide essentially everything is what it generally looks like, and then the colorist is going in and doing giving it all the mood and all the detail and whatever. I try at least, because like I say, Ronald Searle is one of my favorite people with an interesting line, people who can put a bit of damage down with a dip pen, or or like Mobius and Brush or whatever. Those are the people, the people where you look at the original black and white, and that's interesting, and then the color version is interesting, and everything is,
Well, you mentioned two names automatically. You've talked about Mike Mignola and you've talked about Brian Bolland, and you look at their pencils, just the black and white. I would throw Walt Simonson in there as well from the superhero world, but you just look at their black and white stuff, and it's still as powerful than when they start adding the colors on. In fact, I would go as far as to say I would like to see a black and white version of the Killing Joke. I don't want to see it in all its garish colors, especially not in the deluxe super paper. But a black and white Killing Joke, I think, would look gorgeous.
Yeah,
that's just me.
Yeah,
talking about black and white,
somebody will come out with like an Apex edition.
Oh,
hey, lovely.
Tie that in.
Yeah, this is page 3 of it's an adaptation of an old British folk song called "The Unquiet Grave," in which there's a moody young kind of goth teen chap whose love has died, and he goes to the cemetery to lie in a grave for a year and a day. After which her ghost suddenly appears to him and says, "Why are you doing this? and he basically goes, "Like, I just want a kiss from you," and she says this, which is, if you have kissed from my clay cold lips, my breath so earthy strong, with just one kiss from my clay cold lips, your days would not be long, or whatever. It's just so kind of creepy. And the last page is I did two adaptations of old photos. I just kind of love the imagery of them. I quite like what I did with the ghosty girl here, who's just made up of cloth and bugs and oh my god.
Yeah. I like
kind of weird looking at artwork that you've done not even long ago.
I like how his face is scarier than hers.
I did basically create a character to look as moony as possible.
And I like how
consistently. I get the impression that he's been drinking quite heavily throughout this process.
Ironically, you say that when I'm sipping my wine. Thanks. I also like how you've moved away from, if she's been dead for a year and a day, you've moved away from like a skeleton style art. You've still kept some body of the girl there, so that the reader or the person looking at the art can assimilate that this is still his love of his life, not some macabre feature of his love of his life. At least at the top half of the page, as you scroll down, things get a little bit macabre, as you say.
Down.
But another really strong piece. Absolutely. I'm just so impressed.
Thank you. That's my hand lettering as left to his own devices. I have elaborate hand lettering, but you can't do that with the graphic novels because you give yourself carpal tunnel syndrome. So it's quite nice to go absolutely overboard on the shorter things, the shorter pieces, to have really expressive lettering on them.
Well, that's why God gave us letters. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
There we go. I like this one. I feel the main character here looks a little bit Jack Kirby-esque. I know you're not a superhero fan, but but I get that kind of Jack Kirby big head element.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love.
I'm not a massive superhero fan, but everybody loves Kirby.
I love the old school header across the top. I love, it just works for me.
This would have been an event poster for the Cartoon Museum, because we did an evening of a creepy evening at the Cartoon Museum, where I got in lovely Mr. Douglas Noble and Dan White, and it was going to be Kathy Brett. Sarah Gordon would have been good, and me, and we just talked about like horror comics and what made horror comics work, what made them creepy or what made them not work, and whatever. But my idea was we were going to do a similar evening about like romance comics or love in comics or whatever. And I did this poster, and the event never happened, partly because of COVID, but partly because I just, it's easy to talk about romance comics.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I could see. It's interesting because if the Cartoon Museum looks like that and she turns up, I should be there, really, to be honest. But that's kind of my thing. I like how the juxtaposition on this one. You've got the kind of like the heavy drinker in the foreground. He's got his cigarette hanging out of his mouth, a proper bar fly, I think we'd say. And then on the far side there, you've got in the background, you've got the young lady who is holding on to a martini, shaken, not stirred, and kind of on her last legs also. So this is kind of like, the kind of situation many people find themselves in, isn't it? That whole will they, won't they, or should I? Not will I, won't they? It's should I or shouldn't I? That's what this picture is.
It's more of a Tom Waits song in ink.
That's one way of looking at it. One way of looking at it. While I bring up the next picture, I noticed in the blurb for the book, you used to write reviews for something called Electric Sheep. This is obviously a reference to Philip K. Dick's. Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think
the
that
magazine? I don't know why the magazine was. I love Philip K. Dick. I've read a bunch of his stuff. The magazine was just, I don't know why it's called that, but I wrote about cinema for about 10 years or so. I went to the London Film Festival, had a press pass for that, whatever. So I kind of had to knock it on the head, because that's like 2 months out of your life without much money coming in. But you did get to see like a ton of like world cinema and stuff.
Do you think there's a correlation then between like world? Because if you go to the cinema now, it's all big movies. That's pretty much Marvel and DC. Is there then a correlation between stuff like world cinema and cartooning? Is it the same sort of? Obviously, it's a different medium, but is it the same sort of kind of thought process that I want to challenge the reader a little bit? I want to put something down that kind of challenges the
there is
established norm.
There's definitely to that, in that, you know, Dan has made a couple of independent movies. What's his name? Chuck Force? The guy who did Bottomless Belly Button. He's done a couple of independent films.
Okay.
And there's a few other little bits of indie stuff have turned into indie stuff. But you're right. It's the same kind of creative instinct of just trying to get something out there. That kind of more kind of punk rock, kind of let's do it ourselves ethos. It's got that in common. What I wish that and I keep comparing the two, because I do remember like doing the London Film Festival, and there being like you sat on essentially about 6 in the evening. If you went to the Curzon Soho and went downstairs, they had free beer and free wine. So everybody with a press pass
free wine
would kind of yeah. Everybody with a press pass would kind of gather around the table, and you had like a whole bunch of, you know, so there'd be somebody who worked in South Africa, the Belgian film group, and then chat about what they see that day, or, you know, film in general. And the conversation would go from like, you know, the Michael Bay Transformers movies to Bella Tarr movies to, you know, obscure bits of this, and like sort of like fated, you know, films like stuff by Ozu and whatever. And I did like that, in that I wish I could have that same conversation about comics.
Well,
you know, because but it's that thing of so everybody in comics tends to be a fan of the thing they grew up with, is the thing they know stuff about, and then they don't really know about European comics, or they were a massive fan of manga or a type of manga, and they don't really know anything about anything else. Having that kind of an erudite like writer community who can write about comics, and they'll write about, I don't know, whatever latest Marvel comics, but they can make reference to something in manga or something in, you know, another discipline, and they know the whole picture, you know. And that's film or cinema to do. And I don't think we're there yet. That's one of the things I think we're missing in comics, is that kind of people who can just eruditely talk about the entire damn thing, you know, and not be just kind of fan waffling. I don't know.
No,
it's one of my
hobbies. Yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, I'm not. I don't mean to brag or anything, but where I write my reviews for Comic Crusaders, I try and look at like different inspirations. There's always like influences in place. You know, it's not just, you know, I do a lot of indie books because I like the fact that the different ideas. I don't do a lot of Marvel DC because Marvel DC don't need my help in promoting the book. No. I mean, I'm not that big. I'm not that good. The reason why I ask about the movie and comic books thing is, and this might seem like a little bit of an odd one. I remember going to see the Naked Lunch with Peter Weller back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I remember coming back from the cinema from it, and I was a little disturbed. I'm not going to lie. I was a little bit like, what have I just seen? What's going on? The typewriters and everything. I was like, what? Put me off writing for a bit. But then when I look at some of the cartoony horror vibes that you've got going on, I'm not saying it's quite as forceful as that, but there is still that challenge, and I think that's what I like, the fact that it is challenging my preconceptions. It is challenging my eye to see something different, rather than instead of just taking it at face value, look for the details, and of which your art has plenty of details. So
thank you.
So I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, Dave Hine, who I collaborate with, is a massive William Burroughs fan. So I have drawn a lot of rather creepy looking insects and stuff over the time.
Watch out for the typewriters. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
So obviously,
that's one of the things I love.
Typewriters. So this last one, the one we're looking at here. I know it says join a mob as a header, but just looking at the image itself, I'm expecting these are chasing down Penelope Pitstop, aren't they? No?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
So they look like the antler is what I'm trying to say. They're small and like, giving it legs. That or the Angry Seven Dwarfs, one of the two.
Yeah. They are somewhat stunted.
But again, another
fun image, really.
If you like your horror books, for example, you must have seen this a gazillion million times. This is the angry mob coming to get Frankenstein. No sense of gun control because there's a kid got 12 bore there. Yeah. That's interesting. No worry about knife control because there's a knife there. But it is that sentimentality, isn't it? That the idea of something's gone awry. Let's get a gang together. Yeah?
Let's get a gang together and attack. And of course, these days there's join the mob, and it's or at least a few years back there was that kind of, or today, that the internet thing of before you've even thought of anything or done any research or whatever, a whole bunch of people are really, really angry about something they've barely touched the surface of.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, a few years back, it's all the big
it's kind of where this. It's kind of where this came from. But I always did love those scenes in the James Whale Frankenstein movies, where everybody would suddenly go, "Yeah!" and suddenly from nowhere, pitchforks and whatever would appear. Yeah. So it's just a fun image to draw, and I always loved Spooky Forest.
I bet maybe it's a bunch of England fans going to go to see the French game. I don't know. It's like got knocked out. Although I will say I have boycotted this whole World Cup. I have because of the whole where they are and what they're doing. Okay. So I've not seen a single World Cup game at all. Yeah. So I mean I'm generally boycott these things by not being interested at all. But weirdly, look, this is the one I'm most interested in because of the whole Qatar thing of suddenly all these people who've never seem to have thought about politics before in their lives are suddenly going, oh, maybe it's a bad thing that we, export these horrible labour practices and whatever. Yeah.
It is.
My wife was very pleased with my decision when I said we're not watching the football this month. Oh, okay then. Yeah. Oh dear, what a shame. Right. Okay. So you are on social media, Mark. You've got the whole lot going on. Here we go. You've got your Twitter. In fact, let me just dig up my Twitter and I shall do this live. Which first of all, I'll check I'm on the right one because I've got several Twitter accounts. It's Mark Stafford.
MARXFORD.
Boom, there you go. You now have a new follower. That's that sorted. Instagram, and of course, good old Facebook. Check that out. LinkedIn, sign, follow Twitter, whatever you do on all these things. Look at my hair. Yeah. Does it look like I know what social media is? If you're interested in becoming number 70, 71, or 72, or even 80th pledger, go and check out the project. It's there. So you can either follow the link. So pause the pod. Don't pause it now. Pause it later. Take a foot screenshot or whatever. Or you can just go to crowdfunder.com and type in Salmonella Smorgasbord Can't say that too easy. And it'll take you straight there. And there's more examples of Mark's fantastic art there, so you can see what you're getting yourselves into. And when I say fantastic art, I mean fantastic art, because it is creepy, it's clever, it's witty. It is practically every extension of every genre you would want to expect from a cartoonist, and it's done
thank you
brilliantly. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean,
Cool.
I hope there's a kind of journey in there from horrible, snarky stuff to actually emotionally heartfelt stuff to designy stuff to whatever. It's all, my whole existence is in there, or my whole cartooning existence.
Your whole cartooning. Cool. Excellent. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, sir.
Oh, cheers. And you? Pleasure, thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. It's fine. You've had the links. You know where to go to check out Mark's stuff. Don't forget to check out the UCPM for all your favourite pods, including the Old Timers Comic Book Show for books of a certain age. And yes, I know we've been talking about them. There is a DC show, the Definitive Crusades, and a Marvel show, the No Prize Podcast. But of course, if you want to know where the real secrets are, it's go back and check out the Outside the Panels. There's a fair few of them. Go check them out. Okay. Mark, once more, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So what I will say is I've been your host, Johnny Machine Hughes. Until next time, adios.
Goodbye.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.